Now, here's a video that I've been wanting to make for a very long time. Decathlon has finally released their first Dyneema tent under the Simon brand, and I got to test it out pre-release. Let me show you. This is a two-person tent with a weight of a mere 510 grams and a couple of great features that immediately make it one of the most interesting tents on the market in Europe and beyond. But let's first talk about why this is such a big deal. A tent is usually the heaviest thing in a hiker's backpack, and the weight of traditional materials like polyester and nylon make it difficult to get the weight of it under 1 kilogram, under 2 pounds, and usually more for a fully featured tent. Simon's most popular lightweight two-person trekking tent is almost 2 kilograms, and their first stab at making a minimalist single-wall tent, what Decathlon calls a tarp tent, comes in at 1,300 grams for the two-person version. So we're counting grams, we were down to 1,300 grams, and now suddenly 620 grams for a two-person tent? How did that happen? Well, in the last 10 to 15 years, a number of small cottage companies have begun making tents from DCF, or Dyneema composite fabric, a material that is dramatically lighter than traditional tent fabrics. It's extremely strong for its weight, it's completely waterproof without relying on coatings, and it doesn't sag when it's wet. And so you might very well ask, if this is such an amazing fabric, why aren't all hiking tents made of Dyneema? Well, because it also has a couple of downsides. The fabric itself can be up to 10 times as expensive as traditional materials. It's also pretty difficult to work with. It has to be bonded and taped and reinforced, and it has a few quirks when it comes to durability. It's great in some respects, but less so in others. For example, it's not very abrasion resistant, and that means that you can get holes in the fabric if it rubs against something for longer periods of time. For example, this is a bag made from Dyneema with a couple of holes from bike packing last year. Can't show you the holes because they've been taped, but you get the picture. Lots of vibrations, of course, on a bike, but I doubt that this would have happened with a nylon bag. You can just imagine the agony of having this happen with an expensive tent on your first trip. All of this has meant that large manufacturers have mostly shied away from using Dyneema, and finding a Dyneema tent outside of North America has been pretty difficult and expensive. I bought a Zpacks Duplex a couple of years ago, and I could have bought a perfectly fine polyester tent with just what I paid in customs. Additionally, there was no way to test any of these tents out. You just had to decide based on online reviews and hope that it was a good fit. So it's great that with Decathlon, we finally have a big player selling a Dyneema tent that we can actually go out and touch, a tent that also takes the whole customs gamble out of the equation. That is great news, provided, of course, it's also a good tent. And honestly, you need a weeks-long hike through ever-changing conditions to definitively answer that question. But I do feel I've had it long enough to give you some insight into what this tent is and what it isn't. The first thing I did was set it up next to the Zpacks Duplex, which is probably the most sold Dyneema tent in the world. And you can see that Simon had a comparable tent in mind, which makes sense, of course. If you're gonna make a niche product, at least aim for the most popular thing in that niche, right? This is a two-person tent with dual vestibules, a fairly simple A-frame design that is held up by two 115 centimeters trekking poles. You will have to bring your own poles since they're not in the box and they're not included in the advertised weight either, which is good news for those who are already bringing trekking poles anyway. For anyone else, if it's any consolation, I find that needing to bring them for your tent is a good way to start using them, and they do have their benefits if you don't see that now. Don't worry, you will in time. Now, it's important to know that while they're expensive, these are not the best tents for every hike. When you buy a €1,000 smartphone, it's gonna be better at almost everything than a €200 model. Tents don't necessarily work the same way. This type of tent is great for people who count grams, who hike long distances, who value speed and efficiency over absolute bomb-proof security. They're at their best on trails that can be rainy, but not extremely windy or cold, and where you have soil that allows you to stake your tent, because these are definitely not freestanding. Great for the Camino de Santiago, great for many of the GR trails, for the big American true hikes like the Appalachian Trail and the PCT. Still usable, but perhaps not ideal for stormier and rocky destinations like Patagonia or part of the Alps and the Scottish Highlands. But let's get back to comparing these two tents. Despite the low weight, these are not small. They give you a ton of living room and they take up a fair bit of space. The Duplex is closer to a hexagon. The Simon has more of a diamond shape, which moves the highest point of the tent to the spot where you will be sitting up straight. Dimensions are pretty close, with the Simon slightly shorter, but they've raised the foot end slightly with these vertical rods, creating more space. A width of 120 centimeters means that while this tent can sleep 2 people, it can fit 2 wide mats. One wide and one regular would work as long as you leave your backpack and your need for personal space in the vestibules. Using it alone is a lot more pleasant because of the extra space, but also because it allows you to sleep diagonally. And I think for everyone taller than 185 centimeters, 6'1", that is a great option to have because a floor length of 225 centimeters might sound like overkill, but this is a single wall tent. You do not want to touch the ceiling because it's going to be wet with condensation, especially in the morning. That is the big trade-off with single wall tents. You get lightweight construction and easy pitching, but you can't touch the walls. And it's easy when you're on the ground in the showroom sizing it up, but add a sleeping pad, especially one of these new super plush sleeping pads, and then add a sleeping bag, and well, you see how this might start to become a problem for taller people. Mind you, this is a problem with all single wall tents, so not just with a Simon. A couple of small things, small touches that I especially enjoyed were the magnetic door latches, also the zippers, because often with these ultralight tents you get other ways of closing up, but none as easy as a good old-fashioned zipper. There's small mesh pockets in the corners so you know where you put your phone, and my personal favorite, loops up top for a clothesline so you can dry your stuff inside your tent. A small thing, but very, very useful. I've always felt that Dyneema tents have a more homemade feel, since Dyneema is a notoriously difficult fabric to work with, but I must say the finishing on this one is actually really clean. The storage bag is really the only part where I noticed some sloppy looking workmanship. Decathlon may be a bit late to the game in designing this kind of tent, but it's clear they've taken a good look around and borrowed a lot of good design ideas and small touches to come up with what I think will be a real contender on the ultralight market. Does that mean that I have zero issues with this tent? No. I actually have one big area of concern, one big question mark that I haven't really been able to resolve in my testing, and that is ventilation. If you look at the Zpacks Duplex, you can see that it sits really high. There's 15 to 20 centimeters of clearance all around, and they've made the bathtub, the outside of the tent floor, extra high so you don't get any rain splash inside. They do that because they're aiming for maximum airflow, because when you're inside the tent, your breath and your damp gear add a lot of humidity. Constant airflow helps carry that moisture away before it condenses on the roof. There's no vents up top, just a lot of space underneath. Simon has a comparable design, but it sits a lot lower, and that does have its benefits. This is going to be a lot less drafty, it's going to be warmer in cold wind, but the downside is less ventilation, more moisture buildup, and condensation. Now, if I'm being totally honest, I haven't really run into this in a big way. So perhaps Decathlon has found a way to fix this that I don't understand, but it's also possible that I just haven't been in the kind of situation where ventilation matters most. Humid conditions with no wind and 2 people in the tent. So it's early days and might be a non-issue, but if you're watching this in a couple of years, that would be the first thing that I would Google. What are people's experiences with ventilation and condensation in this tent? I feel I've skipped over a lot of things. Waterproofing is great, as you'd expect from Dyneema. Packability is fine. It's not super compact, but it is single layer, so it's very easy to pack and unpack. Setting it up and pitching is fairly quick once you get the hang of it, and importantly, if your trekking poles are the right size. This is definitely not designed to be a 4-season alpine fortress like a Hilleberg, but I actually had a couple of windy nights, and I can't really say I had any issues. There are some extra guy out points if you want more peace of mind. Oh, and one extra piece of rope that I would definitely invest in is one to tie to this loop here, because this draws the outer away from your head and that creates a surprising amount of extra space. Bonus points if you find a way to create some vertical tension for even more headroom. Thanks to my friend Steve for this great little hack. Finally, the big question, how much does it cost? Launch price is 750 euros. I'm sure a lot of people were hoping for Dyneema on a budget, and I'm sure there will be disappointment in the comments underneath this video. That's a given. But even for Decathlon, this is a niche product, and Dyneema, like I said, is up to 10 times more expensive than traditional materials. So this was never gonna be a 400 euro tent. 750 euros is 3 times the price of a normal 2-person trekking tent at Decathlon, 3 times the price for 1/3 of the weight, with some of the unique benefits of Dyneema and some of the annoyances of a single wall tent. I'm sure that not everyone will see the value in those trade-offs, but for those that do, let's take a look at the alternatives. There's a couple of EU stores selling tents like the Zpacks Duplex at a little over 900 euros, same price as a Durston Gear X-Mid Pro, also a very solid choice by the way. There's Bonfis, an Italian brand that makes similar 2-person tents at 800 euros, including shipping. Then there's Lightweight from Ukraine, another interesting brand that also has some Dyneema shelters. They don't have this exact style of A-frame tent, but prices are very similar. So you can see Decathlon's logic in pricing this. If this is the type of tent you want, you're not gonna find it elsewhere, and certainly not with the 5-year warranty Decathlon offers. If I'm missing any interesting options, be sure to let me know in the comments. Bottom line, Simon has made a very solid entry into the world of true ultralight tents, borrowing good ideas from what came before while still making something that is decidedly their own. It's probably too expensive to be a real bestseller, but it's nevertheless a godsend for the right kind of weight-focused hiker, and it makes me very curious about what is next for Simon.